Hello and welcome. Today we are Wednesday at the time of recording. It is the final of the leg one has happened and it was quite crazy. We will study primarily today the weather forecasted for the next leg, which starts Saturday, which is from Cascais to Alicante, and we will, the race will enter the Mediterranean Sea. Which is very tricky, and we will, look a bit of the weather forecast and what are the traps that are coming up, and also discuss the predictability of our weather forecast and model, especially with, in Mediterranean Sea, which is really complicated and tricky. That being said, I would like to mention, one aspect of the finals of the leg one, because I think I have one thing that I would like to share with you. If we jump onto it and we go back to the final few hours of the race at the critical moment in the race. So as you probably know, Mirpuri is in the Euro 65 the leading contender, or one of the leading contender for the win, and was leading the race for essentially the entirety of the race and finished last. So everybody is so compact. It was a bit of a lottery today on the end, which is a bit sad sometimes. I mean, the lottery has some effect that, the leading team can be completely losing, which is the case here. However, I came back to, thinking, oh, the poor guys, they invested so much and they finished last, which probably, given the way the ranking is computed, is essentially eliminating their chance of winning the European ocean race, because there are only 3 legs. To be tough from last to end up first. That being said, they did make a real mistake, I think. If we go back to this particular moment, we see that 2 boats have tacked south. Corum was the first to decide to go south instead of north. It was engaged to a northern course, or northern option, and decided to jibe and go south the first. Then 11th hour did the same at the last possible moment. They waited as far as possible. After that, they were behind the exclusion zone, so they would have been committed. But they decided to jibe here, and essentially they actually did some negative VMG around here, this path. So it was really a tough decision to cancel. But Corum and Lepan ended up winning, and 11th hour was second. So clearly they made a great decision, and they had the time to catch up. Those guys, they were helped by the crazy weather at the end, but still. So I think, if we go back just slightly more, I don't know if at that time Corum already had decided to go south, but clearly they jabbed and didn't, decided not to go too far north like Bureau Valley did, which was completely committed and no option to, hedge its bet and go south. I don't know at what time they really decided, but clearly between now, where maybe Corum had decided to go south, and here, when 11th hour decided, Mirpuri was in a position to still do it. And they decided to continue. While 2 out of the 4 boats that were committed to north decided to go south, while Bureau Valley was not possible for them to go south. So, and I think Mirpuri had the opportunity to do it. They decided not to do it. To some extent, it's tough. I mean, they end up last, but they were 5 minutes behind the first VO65. On the other hand, on the ocean race, that's the kind of normal gap that we see typically, and between 5 to 15 minutes. It's extremely tight, even for transoceanic race legs. So I think here Mirpuri did, pay hefty price for their mistake, but on the other hand, they had the opportunity to change. So we are now armchair, comfortably, completely amateur, and criticizing people who are clearly professional and really, really good at it. But on the other hand, I think it's not just the unfairness of the weather forecast. I think they had the information. Some teams had the information, so clearly they had it to make a different decision. So that's about the end of leg 1. Let's go into leg 2 and the weather forecast. So this is essentially the leg here, going south all the way to Gibraltar and then continuing to Alicante along the coast of Spain. There are a lot of exclusion zones. I think, these 2 are pretty clearly left on the starboard. There is no point, except for very special weather, it's unlikely that the boats will go around. However, there is some play here to do. I don't know, I suspect there is, a decision to be made here. Again, this other exclusion zone, clearly the old boats will probably cross inside. I do not have yet made the exclusion zone. It's a bit long, so I didn't place any exclusion zone for now, but I think it's enough to study a bit what are the routing. So the two boats, the two routing here are showing up. So in yellow or greenish, the IMOCA and the VO65 in pink. The color coding is essentially a bit random, automatically selected. And this is a bit of the weather forecast. Yeah, right there when they will start on Saturday. I decided noon around UTC, but it's approximately that. It's not, you know, the exact starting time, but it's pretty close. So a few things to say. Like, so the weather forecast is pretty good for the start of the race with decent wind, 15, 20 knots of wind on a reach or very broad reach. Actually, there'll be a bit too downwind, like it will be VMG downwind. So not super favorable to foilers. Actually, they would not be. It will be a bit too much of a. The wind will be too much of a on a reach. But that being said, it will be going fast at first, and the first few hours they will essentially by the evening they'll be past this area of good wind and leave that front essentially and enter an area of light wind. This area is interesting because, as you can see, there is a big difference between the two fleets in terms of optimal course. I want to emphasize that actually this is more showing us essentially all the options available, and I expect that why the fleet will be taking a very similar course at first, full south, with very little, probably all back to back, and very little, the fleet will not be widespread. Here in this area, they will probably spread out a little bit, especially on IMOCA, which have different, the boats are not the same. So they have slightly different polar and slightly different choices to make. But here, this area will be tight. There is an advantage of taking a slightly longer course because the winds are there's a bit more pressure. I don't expect people to, go that far north here because the weather forecasted is extremely light, and the model here, is saying, oh, there'll be, 3 knots of wind. But actually, what we'll have is that you will have 0 wind and then 5 knots or 7 knots of wind and 0 wind. So, and the direction will be shifting all the time. So I expect people to, go along this ridge here. That makes more sense to me. But, the weather forecast will also change probably from now to Saturday. And then something that will probably be pretty consistent is that entering Gibraltar all the way to this part of the race, they'll be going on a reach or a close hole against the wind. There's a bit of pressure announced here for Gibraltar, which is good probably because there's a lot of cargo, so you probably want to have some wind to not get stuck. To facilitate the crossing of Gibraltar, but they'll be again going upwind. One note about the polar I've used, I have extended slightly and pushed a bit the IMOCA polar to be a bit faster. My polar are designed for single handle crew. Now I think I pushed them a little too far, and I think upwind, they won't be as fast as that. So, but that being said, both fleet are expected to be quite close together, with a slight advantage for IMOCA. But I may be this time a bit optimistic compared to last time where I was for leg one a bit pessimistic for IMOCA. So this is essentially the entrance of Mediterranean Sea. What the weather forecast is announced really dead. Wind is exactly in the route, full east. So what you are seeing here are the boats stacking and making their course upwind. They will probably be making a lot more tacks and keeping themselves in the center of the area. And this will be interesting actually because there may be a lot of crossing. We'll see. Not all boats may be on the same tack at the same time. So it can be quite beautiful actually. And I hope we will see some nice views, some nice pictures and videos. That being said, the wind forecasted here during that area is pretty good. 11 with big gusts. And then climbing up to 20 knots of gusts here, 15 to 20 knots. So there'll be some good wind here, which is good. One word about Mediterranean Sea, it's not an easy sea to navigate because it is landlocked. And so each lands have a lot of influence on the weather patterns. And so weather patterns are much smaller than the Atlantic, and the models, I think my models are pretty accurate on the boundary of the weather, the weather pattern, for the weather pattern essentially. So I don't, I expect a lot of difference between the model projected here and the actual reality, as we saw, for example, at the end of the leg 1 today. And after having done a lot of close haul, the wind is expected to be very light, and again an ending with light wind, probably on the reach, similar to what we saw on Cascais. This may change a bit. If we play a bit more, we see that the wind is really dying. So hopefully it won't be as bad as a lottery as today, as leg 1. That being said, that's about what we have to expect. A lot of going upwind and some good wind along the passage of Gibraltar all the way to this area before ending with light wind again. Expect very fast starting, broad reach, good wind, and probably the foiler taking some advantage, but being with VMG may not be as impressive as what they have happened during leg 1. So that's about it for today. The next race is actually Friday. Yes, Friday there'll be a local race in Portugal. Because it is local, there's no point for me to do any forecasting, right? It's a typical race between 3 boys. But on the other hand, I'm really looking forward to this next leg. And on that, I wish you fair winds and following seas, and see you soon.